Now today we're opening with a keynote. And I start with a quote from the keynote speaker. I deliver passionate messages about otherwise dry rollouts of infrastructures. What a good reason to invite Cathrin for giving a keynote at CoRDI. She's the Chief Collaboration Officer at GÉANT. And if you, like me, are, for example, using EduRoam for checking your emails, then you have a professional relationship with Cathrin, as you will learn in her keynote. Maybe more importantly, she is one of the founding directors of EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud. She was actually chairing the very first EOSC symposium. So she was, from the very start, on the journey of the European Open Science Cloud. She has a track record in organizing European infrastructures and in explaining what they are and how they are important. And today I would like to invite her to the keynote with a long title, in a nutshell, Why Dedicated Connectivity and Services for Science and Education are Indispensable for Europe's Scientific Leadership. Please welcome Cathrin on stage.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you so much, Jörg, for this lovely invitation and for getting me on this rather intimidating stage. Thank you also to Robert and everybody here at RWTH Aachen. I think yesterday evening was fantastic, and I'm amazed how many of you are here. So thank you for that as well. We talk about infrastructure today, and yesterday somebody said, in 5 years' time, I want somebody to talk about NFDI and say, that's such a cool job. Now, I'm not entirely sure I agree, because good infrastructure is actually invisible. Infrastructure you tend to only know about if it's not working. When EduRoam is working, nobody of you cares. When it's not working, you all start bitching. Infrastructure, to a certain extent, needs to be invisible. And that is just like, and here I would like to take you in my kitchen, it's just like when you're cooking. You're not interested in your stove, in your oven, in your fridge, maybe in your espresso machine. But really what interests you, and what interests you as a scientist, is the new recipe. Can I cook this? Can I do this? How does this work? Yes, you need a stove. Yes, you need electricity. Yes, you need a fridge. Yes, you need everything in your kitchen. But you don't think about that. And that is infrastructure. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, quick introduction to GÉANT. What's GÉANT? GÉANT is a membership organization of 39 national research and education networks in Europe. In Germany, that is das Deutsche Forschungsnetz, DFN. If you're from the Netherlands, your NREN, National Research and Education Network, is SURF. If you come from Austria, you have ACONET. If you come from Belgium, you have BELNET. If you come from Iceland, you have the Icelandic Research and Education Network. Every country in Europe has a national research and education network. And what they do is they provide you with the underlying network connectivity, terrestrial infrastructure, so that your traffic, your email, never has to go through the commercial internet, but stays in a dedicated backbone in Europe. Interesting to us is we're a membership organization, we have one member per country. So this is an interesting concept. We're saying we have one member per country, not two, not three. If you have a federated German environment, we still only have one representative in our General Assembly, that's DFN. We connect 50 million users across all of Europe. So I would assume that all of you are using my infrastructure services and you've never heard about it. And that's fine. This is how the network looks like. This was the first research and education network globally with terabit capacity. We can today ship 800 gigabit of traffic from A to B, covering, as you can see, all of Europe in a very, very redundant and resilient network. This network never sleeps, this network never lets you down. We're terabit ready, which is important because EuroHPC is coming up, big data flows are coming up, and I would like to say that this is where Europe leads. There's no other continent in the world, including the United States, none of that have this network. Nobody has this sort of collaboration. Nobody offers to science a dedicated network with capacity such as this. And we are in the heart of global research and education. So if you're a scientist, and I thought it was very interesting in the keynote on Tuesday, the gentleman from MBI was saying, we have 123 million websites looked at worldwide. And I was like, yes, because of us. So you can see here we connect all continents in the world. Globally, you have a dedicated research and education network. Your traffic hardly ever leaves our environment, which is really nice because you have a bandwidth available that in the commercial internet you would not have. It is sometimes, the question is, gee, how did you guys get so global? That's amazing. Yes, it is. But before we talk about that, I would like to look at how these national research and education networks work together globally. Because here suddenly you have a completely different environment, while in Europe, 39 partners can come together 3 times a year for General Assembly. How do we work this on a global basis? Already yesterday in the international discussion in the evening, people were talking about, do we need global governance? What does that mean? How does global governance work? Well, again, on a federated basis. I've put the DFN, das Deutsche Forschungsnetz, here quite centric, and I've chosen Aachen, of course, and Dresden, because I really like the TU in Dresden. Anybody here from there? No. Put Aachen and Dresden here as examples of 2 institutions connected to DFN. And now an engineer in Aachen says, well, really, you know, I have this amazing research project with the University of Cuenca in Ecuador. Do I have connectivity? And the answer is yes. How does that work? Well, you see, connectivity from Aachen goes to the DFN, and from DFN into our node in Frankfurt, and from there into the GÉANT network, and then via our transatlantic connectivity, you can see that, into our point of presence in Fortaleza in Brazil, and then from there into the Red Clara network, which is our partner, the GÉANT-like infrastructure in Latin America. From there into CEDIA, the research and education network of Ecuador, and from there into the Universidad de Cuenca. Up and down, but with as few hops as possible, and this is what you want in your traffic. You don't want your traffic to be routed 3 times around the world. You want it as straight as possible. Our network, our collaboration with our international partners means that we have as little hops as necessary to get our partners worldwide. Equally, we can do this in Uganda with a research and education network in Uganda, connected via the UbuntuNet Alliance, the research and education network in Eastern Africa. We have partners in Western Africa. We have, of course, partners in Northern Africa, and very important here, to your right is the entire TAIN network, that is everything that is in Asia Pacific. And just there in Asia Pacific, we have taken here the example of the university in Dhaka, that is of course in Bangladesh, to show you that we also connect small countries in Asia like Bangladesh, but of course you have connectivity to Japan, China, Korea, what have you, Australia. Wherever you want to go, you have connectivity. How did we do this? Well, this has not been something that comes overnight, obviously. It's quite a piece of work, because as GÉANT, what we do is we don't only put the infrastructure into the ground, we also build, when necessary, the organization to run such infrastructure. We started early on in North Africa with UMED Connect in 2001. And these were development aid projects funded by the European Union, who was saying, if Europe wants to lead scientifically, globally, we need to connect researchers globally into one environment where it doesn't matter whether as a scientist I sit in Bangladesh, or I sit in Guatemala, or I sit in Germany. I have the same environment. And this is what GÉANT's been doing. Over the years, we have had development aid projects where we've done both, build infrastructure and build the organization. And then in 2016, here you can see with Bella, we've changed. Why? Because we've seen that most organizations have now been built. Most of these infrastructures are stable. And then we started to look at, can we start owning submarine cable systems? Because this is really important. Today, submarine cable systems are owned no longer by telecom operators, but of course by the big GAFAM. Microsoft runs their own systems, Google runs their own systems, and you can't just go into the market and buy capacity from them. So it's increasingly important for resilience and redundancy in Europe that Europe owns our own submarine cable systems. Bella was the first of what the European Union calls global gateways, and here GÉANT acts as an anchor tenant. We bring the market together because we are not for profit. We can talk to market operators in a non-competitive way. And we bring our procurement, you can imagine procuring connectivity across the world. I can tell you what connectivity costs between London and New York, and I can tell you what connectivity costs between Nigeria and London. We know how to procure connectivity, so it's been really useful to help the European Union act as an anchor tenant, bring the market together so that Europe can build capacity, such as Bella, between Europe and Latin America, for resilience, redundancy, and sovereignty of Europe. In an equal way, we've done that here with the Bella 2, and then you see the Blue Round and the Medusa cable systems. Again, resilient capacity for Europe. But let's have a look at how, connectivity, when it comes to a continent, how does that evolve? Because you can imagine that here we have, before 2010, the African continent had 5 operating research and education networks. In Northern Africa, that is because of our work that we have carried out in prior projects, but Sub-Saharan Africa really only had South Africa. Nobody's surprised here. But when you consider climatology, when you consider that we need to have food security, you need to bring the African continent onto the table. And this has been very critical for us. So we've worked with the European Union again on bringing capacity to the African continent. And this is really interesting because what works very well in Europe, in the West, what works still in Latin America, what works less so already in Central America, and what you have a real issue with perhaps in Africa, is a lot of underlying infrastructure. So it took 15 years to come to a picture where we are today, where, as you can see, East Africa is very well connected these days, with research and education networks in 14 countries via the Internet Alliance. West Africa is still an issue. West Africa still suffers from a highly monopolistic environment. The West African cable systems even are monopolistically limited in the sense that cable landing stations are not easy to access. So here we still have an issue, but we're making progress, and the progress is one country at a time. It is very, very difficult, but we absolutely believe that this is what we have to do. So development aid in that respect, or helping another continent get to the same advancements for their research and education, is in Africa still ongoing. In other continents, we have more or less solved this. Excuse me? And then when I say we have solved this, I said that now we are looking really into sovereignty for Europe. How do we make sure that European science and the European continent is connected and nobody can switch us off? You can only do that if you have more than one cable system. You can only do that if you own that cable system. So Medusa is the latest project where we are again involved. And again, this is you know, where it's public-private partnership to a certain extent. These cable systems will, of course, be used by European commercial operators. But we will have capacity over 10 years for European science for free, because GÉANT is doing the work, bringing the market together. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And how deep do we go? Well, you can see that in our new system that we're looking at the moment, Blue Raman. This is a system that will connect Europe finally to India. Again, a cable system owned by Europe, financed through the European Investment Bank. And if you look quite carefully here, and this is you know, a slide directly from my colleagues in the network architecture team. This is where we look at resilience of cable systems. So you look at what's already, what do we already have? What do we, as research and education networks globally, already use? And how can we find a path where we have as little as possible single points of failure? And this is quite a puzzling piece of work, but it is absolutely essential to do this work and to look at, you know, where are the converging points, where do we need to take particular attention to make sure that our systems are redundant. So you can get from that GÉANT is an engineering organization, we're a procurement organization. And now you know that this map is not just a PowerPoint with a lot of nice lines, but you understand what it actually means. Underlying submarine cable capacity for Europe, bringing research and education in Europe to the heart. Because again, no other continent, from a research and education point of view, is as well connected as you guys are. GÉANT services. We're leaving the ground, we're going one step up. Jörg was saying, EduRoam is one of our most known services. I'm asking the question, think, after all you've heard so far, the countries we're in, how many times has EduRoam been used in 2024? Can you give us an estimation? Shout out. And I'm taking in billions or in Milliarden, whatever, or in hundreds of thousands. What do you think? Bridget, what do you think?
It's about 20 billion.
Yes.
20 billion.
20 billion. 20 Milliarden. Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay. I think Bridget is probably very close, because what we see is 8.4 billion authentications outside of your normal environment. So anybody who's here in Aachen who logs into EduRoam here in Aachen doesn't count. That's normal. That doesn't get counted. These are the ones, the 8.4 billion, when you have been mobile, whenever you have taken your EduRoam account somewhere else. And as you can see, we have EduRoam today in 106 countries. You can land in the airport in Lusaka, and you have Lusaka, Zambia. You will have EduRoam. EduRoam is in public transport in Japan. EduRoam is in Geneva Airport, welcoming people to CERN. EduRoam is everywhere. Tens of thousands of institutions, almost 40,000 hotspots that we know of. Not everything is always counted. EduRoam is an absolute global success. And it has taken 20 years, and people sometimes say, oh, hold on, how did you do that? And it's really interesting, because the dynamics of EduRoam work so differently wherever you go. In most environments of abundance, like Germany, EduRoam was first installed as an, okay, let's do this as well. I mean, they're saying, let's do this. So it is an additional, and then it won. In environments of scarcity, it wins because it shows that your institution has capacity. The University of Nairobi connected to EduRoam, and they were appalled because all the other universities in the city also had EduRoam, but they didn't have the underlying infrastructure. So the students in Kenya, they went to the University of Nairobi to connect to EduRoam. And the University of Nairobi said, hold on, this is not what we meant. Now everybody comes to my institution to use my internet. That's not good. Until the next year, their students came and said, we want to study at the University of Nairobi, nowhere else, because here we get good connectivity. And that then led to everybody else increasing their capacity to the Research and Education Network in Kenya. EduRoam has very interesting dynamics, but it works. And it works for millions of people, students, academics, globally. I know many people who say, well, the worst thing leaving the academic environment was I no longer have EduRoam. What do I do now? EduRoam is, of course, based on EduGAIN. EduGAIN is an underlying infrastructure for authentication. It means that you're authenticated at your home institution. And it is the underlying service for very many, for all of the services above the net that we offer. It means that your credentials are always known to your institution, and wherever you go, that comes with you. You don't have to authenticate somewhere else. Again, EduRoam today is used by 27 million users about. It's a bit less than EduRoam. We're only in 83 countries. Why is that? Because the technology is a little bit more complicated. It's more difficult in the developing world to find engineering capacity that can easily use and implement EduGAIN. But then we look at this entire environment of trust and identity services. And this is a really interesting one, because with the advance of the internet, of course, people started thinking about how do I ensure that the services I make available at my institution are actually used by the people that I want them to use, and not somebody else. So, it's a bit like arriving at the border and having to show your passport, or, driving down the street and having to show your driving license. There's different authentication systems. So, in the 2000s, identity federations kept popping up across Europe. And they were federating nationally, and then EduGAIN was really the first federation internationally, globally. And that works really well. But then, of course, as we all know, science is not only global, science is interinstitutional, science is interdomain. So how do you authenticate here? And this is how we can see the ARC blueprint developing, where structures to enable scalable, secure, trusted collaboration across borders and disciplines have been developed. And then you see out of that came EduTeams. Here we gave again the responsibility to the scientific groups and said, try and organize yourself. But then again, we've seen that that is not necessarily what all research groups can do. So then we developed what is called the CoRDI platform to again scale up the level of trust and say, okay, we provide this now as a service. And out of that, out of the GÉANT CoRDI platform, which is based on EduGAIN and other authentication mechanisms, you get this wonderful picture of all those new identity federations that support the collaborations in research infrastructures. And when you look at this picture, so we're supporting European research infrastructures, we support high-performance computing. And maybe those two left and right top images mean something to you because, of course, the IM for NFDI service is also based on this. I think really interesting is the bottom here, the student mobility one, because here we suddenly talk about student credentials. What happens to my student? I mean, I don't know, I was an Erasmus student, and I'm imagining many of you as well. And it was always one of those things, you've been writing your exam in the UK or in France, and you were hoping that somebody would let your university in Germany know that you've actually done these exams and you would like to get those points for your for your bachelor or your diploma. So Erasmus Plus, Erasmus Without Papers, is now working on a credential system to make sure that student mobility in that respect also becomes easier. Very, very interesting. The student identity card is one of the things that Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission wants to get in place for Europe as quickly as possible. And for GÉANT, because we are, one of the very few players here at the table that is not for profit. We want to keep our feet under the table in these discussions because we do not wish to leave these authenticity discussions, the identity discussions, to Google, Microsoft. We believe this needs to stay in the institutions. Authentication needs to stay in the hands of trusted institutions. Universities form part of that. So this is about the net services. The other thing, and I picked up on that in these reports that all of you have read from the Rat of Informationsinfrastrukturen and from Wissenschaften, is this: do we need to buy cloud services? Should we be doing our own cloud services? If we buy cloud services, how do we avoid vendor lock-in? How do we make sure that data stays in Europe? All these good things, the concerns that we have today. Again, GÉANT, as a procurement organization, first of all, we believe that both of it is possible, but then, of course, we've also jumped into action. And we have a cloud framework, which is really interesting. We signed, and this is crazy, we signed 617 framework agreements across 39 European countries. So, and we have made sure, again, in the conversation about sovereignty of Europe, we have made sure that we have European service providers. You can buy everything American if you like, but today's discussions, you should maybe look at what is available in Europe. To make this easy, we've signed those framework agreements for all universities. Obviously, we have the hyperscalers. I mean, it would be, really naive to believe that nobody would want to buy them now anymore. But we offer European platforms as alternatives, and we believe that they should really be looked at. Equally, service providers. I've chosen here a slide that only shows you the European service providers, because I believe the American counterparts you probably all know. How does this work? This is a framework agreement which we have signed on behalf of all our 39 members. As I said, 617 different service providers have been chosen. And it is now up to you to, if you're interested or in your environment, people have questions around cloud frameworks. This is the moment where I have to say, get in touch with DFN, Deutsches Forschungsnetz, cloud@dfn.de. They are our broker in Germany for you. They can give you everything you need to know as a German institution about how to access these cloud frameworks. We've done our best to make it as easy as possible, and we have done our best to make sure that your requirements are met, whether it comes to GDPR, or you need to have the data stay securely in Europe. 900 institutions in Germany can participate. At this point in time, I understand DFN has already signed agreements with about 140 institutions in Germany, so there's, it's a good pickup. So if you're interested, cloud@dfn.de. Right, EOSC. You still awake? Okay, good. EOSC, yes, EOSC. I mean, I wouldn't be standing here, obviously, if GÉANT didn't also have a hand in the pie of EOSC. Jörg was mentioning that we, as GÉANT, we were very early on involved in EOSC. Our success has often been seen as, why don't EOSC just do what GÉANT is doing and get done with it? It's not that easy. Why? Because EOSC does not have the same level of immediate joint sense of purpose in the community as the GÉANT community. And you know that from among you, right? There is one service, this base for NFDI, where you all come together, and otherwise you're quite dispersed, right? And this is the same in the EOSC environment. EOSC is also not so easy because yesterday we had this wonderful conversation, Barbara Ehler was involved in that, about just getting, just doing the service. Have you ever tried to onboard a service onto a new platform? I was thinking, and I was like, it's probably not just, this is more difficult than you think. So GÉANT is, together with many other e-infrastructures, there are other e-infrastructures in Europe, EUDAT, EGI, you've probably heard about, OpenAir. With these e-infrastructures and also our partners in NRANS, we are service provider to the EOSC.EU node. The EOSC.EU node has been launched last year. They are the core node. They are they're basically the European Union's first implementation showing Europe that a node is possible for the data sharing that Europe wants to see. And we are part of that. The EOSC EU node is the first step in the EOSC Federation. It's a bit like if you would take the entire GÉANT network and say we only have the point of presence in Frankfurt. Okay, doesn't really help you with your traffic, right? It goes into Frankfurt, out of Frankfurt. But you need now additional nodes in order to cover the entire map. And as you all know, and I'm not telling you anything new here, we are in the process of onboarding national nodes into the EOSC Federation. And now I'm using this slide to show that, again, NRANS in other European countries, in Germany you have DFN and you have NFDI, and they're working clearly very closely together, but they're two distinct organizations. In other European countries it's different. There, the Research and Education Network is also the EOSC partner. And here we have also with, in these 13 candidate nodes, the NRANS of the Netherlands, of Finland, of Poland, and of course CERN, which is also one of our associate partners. They form part of the EOSC, early EOSC Federation. And through those partners, we are of course very involved, but we're also of course involved because the underlying core AI service brings a lot of the services together in the EOSC Federation. So, I've told you what we do. We represent 38 NRANs and NordUnet across Europe into an integrated backbone across Europe that never sleeps, 800 terabit capacity. We connect research and education communities worldwide. And we manage a portfolio of research and education network services. So this would bring me to the end of my presentation, but I've read those two reports. So I was thinking, well, I've been in this environment since 1997. I have built research and education organizations in Latin America. I've built them in Africa. Jörg said I was founding director of the EOSC organization. I think I know a little bit about what you need to do as an organization to come together. So I'm using here the open data iceberg that you probably from Detjen, you've probably seen that as an open data iceberg, and you've probably seen that the challenges are all underneath the water level, right? When I'm reading these two reports, I also see very clearly all the challenges are below the water level. What's the ecosystem? Both reports say we don't really know what is the ecosystem. Can somebody start mapping this, please, for us? What is the funding challenge? Yeah, I mean, I think Germany is so lucky because you get all this money on a golden plate. You don't have to go begging. I think researchers in other environments, they're probably crying right now. They wish they would have that level of security of your funding environment. But you have a challenge of skills. You have a challenge of retaining skills. Somebody was saying yesterday, as soon as I have somebody working in artificial intelligence, they stay a year and then they go off and they, what was that, 4 times? They get 4 times more the money that they can earn in my institution. How do I deal with that? So you have an incentives challenge, and of course you have the mindset challenge. So allow me, and this is my personal view, right? So just me, nothing else, no harm. But allow me to talk a little bit about what I see with the NFDI, what I see here in the German environment. So, going back to the recipe book, I've asked myself, well then, you know, what is the recipe for success of these communities? And this ties in with the fishbowl discussion yesterday, of course. What's the recipe for success? What are the I'm not talking about the success criteria. Nothing ever, you know, you don't need to measure. Also, not everything that is measurable needs to be measured, and not everything that is good is measurable. So, what's the recipe for success? Particularly when you have to be invisible. Because as I said earlier, infrastructures that are not invisible because they just failed. We want to remain invisible, but at the same time we want to be seen. No? That's difficult. In my point of view, and maybe this is simplistic, but I think it has worked, and it has worked in all sorts of global environments. You need 3 things. You need validation, you need people, and you need funding. And that may sound very easy, but particularly in the people and in the funding environment, you need to, of course, you know, be very careful on how you make sure that people and funding environment works together. But first, let's look at validation. And we talked about this yesterday, right? You know, you're top down, you're bottom up, and then people say, oh, how do we meet in the middle? Yes, well, we need to meet in the middle, but we need the validation from bottom up and top down. Just meeting in the middle in a top-down or bottom-up organization, that's not enough. You need to be validated. Top-down, bottom-up. How does that work in my organization? Well, daily bottom-up is people, you know, Turnschuhe auf der Straße, right? People using the network. A network that never sleeps. If the GÉANT network falls down, my validation is dead. It can never sleep. It can never be full. At CERN, they find something new, the Higgs boson, whatever. The network needs to be able to cope with that globally in one day, complete spikes. We need to be able to do that. If we can't do that, we have no bottom-up validation. We can never have a scientist say, somebody said it to me yesterday, it's still better to go and put the data into a bully and drive it down the road. No, this is unacceptable for me. Then your institution is not well connected. We have to be able to have any traffic going. 8.4 billion EduRoam authentications, that's validation from the bottom up. You need a service that is absolutely endorsed by everybody, every day, who is using you. 27 million EduGAIN users, but also top-down validation. Top-down validation is not getting the 90 million euros once a year. You need to work for that. You need to give Caesar what Caesar wants. For us, top-down validation is ensuring that the European Union at every time knows how we as GÉANT are supporting their European policy goals. I need, at best, the Director General for DG Connect, DG RTD, DG EA, they need to be able to say, well, without GÉANT, nothing ever happens here. GÉANT supports prosperity in Europe because research and education leads to prosperity. GÉANT supports democracy in Europe because research and education and access to research and education supports democracy in Europe. And Europe is a secure and a free Europe because GÉANT makes sure that our services are secure, that we have redundancy, resilience, sovereignty in Europe. These are the policy goals that we need to support. You need to have that at the top of your lips, at the top of your tongue. This is validation. Validation is very important. You also need to make sure today, 2025, you need to make sure you fit into the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a global responsibility to meet these requirements. Everybody. These are not just goals for the developing world. These are also goals for the rich. We need to make sure in our institutions that we know how we map to the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we map to the twin transition to green and digital? Do we support green when we talk digital? These sort of things are top-down validation. Independent of your project reports, you need to talk at the higher level. Right, people. This is our community. I notice Peter Gietz here is on my picture as well, and he sits there. So there is a hand over here. But we have a very strong underlying community. The GÉANT community, we have many task forces and 6. Globally open, they're open to you, they're open to anybody who's connected to DFN, they're open to our global partners. We come together, and it's very much, if you look at that, it almost looks like, you know, the different consortia that NFDI also has here. So you need to have a very strong underlying community. You have to have community dialogue at all times. It's absolutely essential. The GÉANT community is small. We think that about 4,500 people globally are in this constant dialogue, but they are essential. And you need to give these people a feeling of community. Now, I'm Chief Communications Officer. I always say that my team gives the look, the voice, and the feel. We have excellent design, we give talks, we write material, and the feel for our community comes together in our conferences. A strong community conference brings a community together. This is absolutely essential for holding people in the community. But also, institutionally, and again we come here to the skills challenge. In today's world, where everything is digital, where all these commercial digital partners can pay 3 times as much money as maybe my organization can pay to a young and ambitious engineer or data scientist, you need to offer people something that they cannot find in the commercial environment. We have found that the most important thing here is values. You have to have a value conversation. I know that the NFDI has a strategy conversation, but I would really encourage you, don't do strategy without values. You have to have a value conversation, because values is where people find themselves. They don't find themselves in a strategic vision or mission. It's just, you know, the KPIs coming down. No, where do you get them? You get them with the values. Our values are community, trust, innovation, and passion. Passion is so important, and I know the NFDI community is full of passionate people. But unless you recognize that as a common value, you don't, you know, there's something missing in your construct. Make sure you have a value conversation, because the values is what carries you through. The values is making sure that you go through difficult conversations as well, because you can say, look, you know, I still trust you. We don't agree, but I trust you. This is important. Value propositions for employees, absolutely essential. You need to really tell them what is there in this organization apart from your paycheck. Very important. And then awards. We have community awards, we have employee awards, we have a very strong award system, but we also make sure that ever so often we apply to external awards. This year, the GÉANT project, which was the project that upgraded our European backbone, we submitted that to the European Digital Connectivity Award, and were nominated. We hope on the 7th of October we will win this prize. But this is how people in our community are kept together. Awards, recognition. You need to have that in your systems. And then we come finally to funding. Funding is very, very important. And of course, when you look at GÉANT and our global activities that I've been talking about, you're probably not surprised that our funding envelope is rather big. In 2024, our 39 partners spent 1 billion, they had a budget of 1 billion euros across Europe in 1 year. So that's 1 Milliarde. 1 billion euros per year, and you see how this is distributed. You can see that in the Netherlands and in the UK, the networks receive a lot bigger budgets than in some of the other countries. So we have that money spent in the national environments, and then here on the other side, I've put the 20 years of the GÉANT project together, and between 2001 and 2024, the European Commission supported us as GÉANT and our community with 590 million euros, right? And here you can see, in fact, when I'm showing this, I can show the European Union how their money has a multiplier effect nationally, which is something that they really like. But I can also show them that they have a capillarity effect, because Europe, in essence, funds the connectivity between the POP in Amsterdam and the POP in Frankfurt and the POP in London and the POP in Bratislava. And then on a national level, DFN funds everything down to your institution. So this is a multiplier effect on the one side and the capillarity effect of funding that you really need to be able to show. How do I fit into this ecosystem? How does the funding flow? How does it make sense? But as I said, funding alone is not enough, right? You need to have the cohesion coming through funding. So what do? When we receive funding environments from the European Union, as the 39 national partners, we come together and we say, what's important to us that we need to fund centrally so that our community stays together? What is it that we all need? And we go through very, very detailed negotiations with our 39 partners, making sure that we consider their policy goals, we consider their networking goals, we consider their national environments, we consider the European environment, of course, and then we take our money and we structure it into how we spend this money. And this is then agreed and shared according to a cost share in our community, but we make very sure that we have funding for underlying services that we all need. We have funding for service developments that we all need. We have funding for the heads, the communications, the procurement team, the finance team that everybody needs. So we really make sure that at all times we fund cohesion. If you as an NREN, you want to do something very specific, maybe you find a different project, maybe you fund that nationally. So this is how, for the last 30, almost 40 years, in Europe, research and education networking has worked together. So if ever anybody ever says there's no model out there that works, that's not true. We work, we've done it. It is possible. You can be a bottom-up, top-down organization. You can meet in the middle. You can find the cohesion. You need to have the values for it. You need to see yourself as a community of trust. You need to say, yes, we have the discussions because we're also passionate about it, and that's fine. But you have to have the discussion on what brings your cohesion together and what keeps you as people happy to work in an attractive NFDI. And with that, if you want to follow us, there's many ways of following us. Please do. We have the Connect website, Connect magazine, Connect newsletter. Come to our conference. Come talk to me after this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathrin. What a keynote. Thank you very much for giving these insights on a really impressive work of infrastructure build-up over so many years. And we can all say thank you for GÉANT for doing this job for the whole community worldwide. Now it's time to
Recognition, thank you.
I think we have time for questions.
Yeah.
So let's check. Where do we have questions? Over here in the middle. That's the first one. There's another one. Yeah, you can start this.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for this impressive talk. I'm very impressed. My question is regarding the cable infrastructure you presented. So you remember for sure the breakdown of the current infrastructure in Spain.
Yes.
Years ago. You remember the attack of the pipeline between Russia and so the Nord Stream pipeline. So what I mean is that cable-based connections are very prone to attacks. So I'm wondering, wouldn't it be better to have like very trust and reliable infrastructure to invest in satellite connections, that you don't have this possibility to break connections with cables?
Very good question. Yes, Valencia, of course, was an issue for us. The POP in Valencia was disconnected. The Iberian Peninsula was never fully disconnected, even though we had an issue also in Madrid. But because our system reroutes fluently via Portugal to France, Spain was always connected. In the North Sea, our partner is Nordinet. They traditionally had 2 redundant links. They now have everything based on 3. We are increasingly working with the European Commission also on looking on how we can increase our redundancy from 2 to 3. Makes a lot of sense. Cable satellite systems, yes and no. Traditionally, satellites are too high up. You really see that in your video conferencing, you see that in your data latency. It is not a good thing for many applications. Lower hanging satellite systems at this point in time are not owned by anybody in Europe. And that is an issue because our network today is owned in Europe, on European infrastructure. The providers are Nokia and Infinera. Infinera now being Nokia, absolutely European infrastructure, European blech, if I may say. So this is important to us. The European Union has this IRIS 2 square project for low-hanging orbits. It's supposed to be coming. We are looking at that with a lot of interest, but at this point in time, cable connectivity is terrestrial connectivity, I think is still the best, unless you are in an environment of earthquake, volcanic environments. Around there, we have, of course, satellite backup. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Is the microphone?
Yes.
Thank you for the great talk as well. It was great. I also have a question towards geopolitics. And so on the map, there were some gray spots within Europe, but also worldwide. In Europe, it was Belarus and Bosnia, probably for very different reasons. Is there, and of course, with the worldwide network, there's a lot of authoritarian states involved. Is there a minimum standard for cooperation or non-cooperation, or is GÉANT politically agnostic towards that, and it rather has technical reasons?
That is an excellent question. You mean these blind spots here? Yeah. First of all, we are self-inclusive. Any country that doesn't have a national research and education network yet, we encourage them to build one, we help you build you, and we encourage you to include yourself. And that has worked everywhere in the world. I mean, if you look at the white spots in Africa, these are regions where, even though we have been in all of those countries, we've not found the champion to take it forward. And that can be somebody at a university, can be somebody at a library. So we are in that respect self-inclusive. We have the big wide area of Russia. Why is that? Because we had to follow European Union sanctions, of course. This is a network that is sponsored by the European Union, and in the very first sanction package for Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, the European Union said that Russian institutions can no longer benefit from European Union funding, and we had to stop connecting to Russian partners. That's not an easy thing to do, because as many of you in the room, we believe that science is bigger than geopolitics. We believe that scientists bring the world together. There's no difference between the scientific thinking of scientists in Uganda and scientists in Germany. We have so much more in common than maybe with other people that live in Germany itself, right? But we had to follow sanctions. This was actually a really interesting one when it comes to the global provision of EduRoam, because EduRoam is also a service that is funded by the European Union. But EduRoam has a global service governance. So we had very difficult conversations with our global partners when we had to stop providing EduRoam services in Russia. Because global partners did not all follow the West in their Russian sanctions, right? The South Africans were like, what do I care? Why can you not provide EduRoam in Russia? From a South African point of view, this would be absolutely fine. And when you have a global service governance, you have to have these conversations. And again, you need to have the trust. And in the end, why did we have to dismantle EduRoam in Russia? Because GÉANT is an organization based in Amsterdam. So you have global service governance shrinking into up, but in the end, you know, it's the organization in Amsterdam that in the end has to follow local law. So this is difficult. What did you say, Bosnia? We have good conversations in Bosnia. The universities are coming together, but we are not there yet, and I believe this will take some time yet. But we are very aware that Bosnia-Herzegovina is the one country in Europe that doesn't have an NRAN yet, and we have a dedicated person in the organization working with Bosnia-Herzegovina. Other questions? 3 minutes.
Aspects. Our traditional allies are not so reliable anymore. Are there any concerns of what is happening with research and education in the US, for example, on all this infrastructure at global level?
No. No. In the US, you don't only have one research and education network, you have two at least. There's Internet 2. That connects all membership organizations through a federated regional networks in the US. I've not heard any restrictions on funding there, apart from the fact that obviously in the US, you know, public infrastructures are generally not as funded as maybe in Europe. The other partner is ESNet, that's the Energy Science Network. They received the funding from the Department of Energy. And here again, they connect all the big research institutions in the US, all the major institutions, Berkeley Labs and the like. And here again, we don't see any restrictions. Mainly also, we profit here as GÉANT and as Europe that all our US partners need to go to CERN. There's nothing they can do, they have to go to CERN. So transatlantic connectivity for the science that is happening in CERN is funded from the US in a stable way because of that need to have the connectivity to CERN. But globally, we are in any case all reciprocal. So Europe owns the links globally, but also our global partners fund the links coming to Europe. So it's a global reciprocal mix of funding. So no, I don't worry about that. Underlying infrastructure normally remains. Just too far down.
Final question from Paul.
Final question from Paul.
Quick question, thanks for this. How important do you think it is to have a front door for infrastructure? So have infrastructure that's visible versus just having the infrastructure go away. So I think this is a discussion I've seen before. Can I see it? European Open Science Dog, can I have a portal to see the infrastructure? Can I have a bridge that I see? Or is it okay to be, as you said, invisible?
Yeah. For us, at the time, pre this digital decade, this digitalization, Europe going completely digital, twin transitions, all the politicians talking digital. Before that, GÉANT could be invisible and nobody worried about it. But today it's a political dialogue. And today the top-down influence is the political influence. And this is why I believe that while we can remain invisible as a functioning infrastructure, we need to give the politicians what they really need. And they need to have the numbers, the big numbers, 8.4 billion authentication. They need to have the big numbers, and they need to understand how you as an infrastructure support their policy goals. Because they don't speak engineering language, they speak policy language. So we need to make it easy for them so they can find themselves, and then we can remain invisible in what we do, but they understand how we contribute to their policy goals. That's the important bit where today we have to be visible.
All right. Dear audience, please join me in a little experiment.
Oh.
You have seen this impressive network. I think it would be fair that we give an applause, which then Cathrin can transfer through the network to all the partners worldwide, making this global collaboration a success. Would you like to join me? This is an idea. Let's go.